Good afternoon. We hold this webinar in the shadow of the passing of Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan, a great scholar, institution builder, and mentor and guide to the cultural sector. Amongst her vast intellectual pursuits, the arts and crafts and its practitioners was a subject that was dear to Kapilaji, and we humbly dedicate this webinar to her memory. Friends and colleagues, this year has brought unprecedented challenges and uncertainties for most of us around the world. None more so than the educational and cultural heritage sector. Yet, this great pause has given us time for reflection. And in our webinar today, we have a remarkable panel of unorthodox thinkers and doers whose cross-disciplinary approaches are deeply integrative and consciously socially inclusive. Our discussion today will center around the education for artisans, past, present, and future. So while we may not have been able to meet in person, I am delighted to introduce the discussants. Judy Frater founded India's first design school for traditional artisans, Kala Raksha Vidyalaya. In 2014, she institutionally enlarged the education and expanded it to other regions by setting up Somaya Kala Vidya. Prakash Narayan Siju is a master carpet weaver. He is a graduate of Kala Raksha Vidyalaya and is presently a graduate advisor of Somaya Kala Vidya. Jaspal Kalra, teacher and designer, is executive director of Kalhat Institute, Lucknow, where education and incubation is empowering Zardozi and Chikankari artisans. Shobita Punja, writer, educator, thinker, and teacher, has worked across heritage, education, and the arts. She serves on eminent boards and governing councils in India and overseas. And Ashoke Chatterjee, mentor and guide, was former executive director and distinguished fellow, National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. And I am Ritu Sethi, editor, Global Inch, Journal of Intangible Cultural Heritage, and founder trustee, Craft Revival Trust. And as the moderator for today's discussion, I welcome you all. My first question is to you, Judy. Judy, having lived and worked in Kutch for over 30 years, why did you feel the need to set up an educational institute for traditional artisans 18 years back?
Thank you, Ritu. And I would like to also thank you and Craft Revival Trust for organizing this panel today. And I remember back to 2006, when the first class of artisan students graduated, and we had a seminar at IIC to a very packed audience. It was a very thrilling experience. So to answer your question, the idea evolved. It didn't just pop into my head like that. I began my long journey in India as an anthropological researcher, and I was studying traditional embroidery. I was interested in the expressive aspects. And so I think that approach is what you could call appreciative inquiry. So I started appreciating from the very beginning. And that sort of evolved to co-founding Kala Raksha with Prakash Banani, and really on the initiative of his sister, who is an artisan. And she said, "Why are you studying us? Why don't you help us?" So that was like, bong, okay. And while working with women artisans at Kala Raksha, I was really impressed with their creativity. I also started a museum for Kalaraksha, and we would ask the artisans to innovate on pieces in the museum, and they were incredibly creative. At the same time, we would bring in designers, and often the interaction was a little bit fraught. And I started wondering, what is it that designers have that artisans don't have? And I found myself muttering, they should start a design school for artisans. And then there was an earthquake, and actually a reporter asked me, what would you like to see come out of this earthquake? And it was probably like very early in the morning, like it is here in Santa Fe now. And I said, a design school for artisans. And then I thought, oh my God, now I'll have to do it. So I understood by that time that artisans could do it all, and they did do it all. They were the creators, the designers, the creators, and the marketers of their work originally. But that cultural ecosystem was disrupted due to industry, commercialization, and the loss of local markets, those well-known markets. So at that point, the artisans I saw had two alternatives. One was to participate in what is called design intervention, and that's when someone else tells you what to do and you just do it. And often, unfortunately, that was done with very little regard for the cultural heritage that I was so interested in. The second alternative would be to sort of randomly innovate for markets that were not very well known. So what I saw, the need that I saw is for artisans to be able to innovate appropriately and maybe systematically, and also to reach those new markets, the better new markets. So my goal was to restore the agency of artisans, give them back their cultural heritage, and enable them to use their creativity, because that's really their strength. We talk about skills, but more than skills, the creativity is the strength. And to do that, to earn respect as well as better income. So, and I also hope that craft traditions could evolve with integrity. So because tradition always evolves, and it evolves as artisans respond to their environment. So I always feel that education is the answer. Whenever you delve into a problem and try to solve it, it seems to me that you come to education as the solution. So I thought a sensitive education program could address all of these issues. And so I began it by engaging successful senior artisans of the community, because I wanted to ensure that we engaged with the community and supported it, rather than even in good intention disturbing it. So that's how it all began.
Thank you, Judy. Before I move on to Jaspal, I want to request our really large audience, I believe there are 750 people who have registered, to please put in your questions into the chat, because when we will be taking up the questions at the end. So on to you, Jaspal. Jaspal, you were fortunate that the first radical step had been taken by Judy. But having said that, the milieu in Lucknow is very different. Tell us about the start of Kalhak Institute, and tell us what its impact has been.
Okay, so as you have already mentioned, the first initiative had already been taken. So Kalaraksha, or now Somaya Kala Vidya, they were the magnets that attracted me long back. So I had an opportunity to be closely associated with these and work closely with Judy, co-work, I would say. And that's where that bond started building with the artisans. So it was the thought process changed from craft to artisan, who became the protagonist for me. So it was about artisan engagement in Kutch, also working with them for long, and then understanding them and how they have transformed, and what So then I started thinking, what about doing something similar in Lucknow, or rather Uttar Pradesh. And in 2014, I started my PhD work, which was about giving design education to chikankari artisans and then studying the impact, which was totally inspired from what Judy has been doing over so many years. Uh, I was fortunate that Maximiliano decided to start at Kalhat Institute in 2017, and I was given an opportunity. So the main thing that we started studying was what are the assets and what are the challenges that UP has. So first, of course, artisans in Kutch, we all know, are entrepreneurial, they're collaborative, they look up to their crafts. And of course, UP has been cradle of so many crafts, and so we had that as an advantage. The skill level is very high, and of course, but there were certain challenges also which we had to address. One was lack of conventional education. I would say they did not have command over any kind of education, though they would have gone through. They are educated in the sense they have gone through a Guru Shishya Parampara or a household education about the craft. But in terms of conventional language skills, yes, those were lacking. They were comfortable with their craft, and it was just about comfort. They could move on to another craft. So besides having great skills, they would not mind selling vegetables also if the artisans could not face challenges, because risk taking was really low. So this was where we entered into this craft, and of course with the strong embroidery skills, and definitely women were more entrepreneurial, and they were more they were more ready to take challenges. Um, but we realized that design and high end was something that we had to closely associate with, because that's the future where artisan could develop. And so we tried to work on a model for knowledge sharing with artisans, where we co-create, co-work with them. Of course, we had the advantage of Kalaraksha, Handloom School, and other organizations which had already created an impact, and they had left some impact on the artisans. So we reviewed that. Kalaraksha had one major advantage, that there were multiple artisans in a class. So, and we were working only with embroiderers. So, to bring about the same impact, we did learn a lot from their experiences. And so, our course was a multidisciplinary course where we made it a formal kind of a system where it was not through peer learning that you would learn from other crafts. We made it a part of the delivery system. So an block baker would take geometry or motif development. A printer would do sessions on color. Like ex-graduates from Kalaraksha also came to talk about the business market understanding and market experiences. So that's how we tried to do a multidisciplinary. So it was not about embroiderer only interacting with embroiderer. We had professionals too. We had senior artisans who started coming. So this is where we started working on the multidisciplinary mode, and there were a lot of collaborative projects, so that we can put them in groups and they can work together, because that was one more factor where we really had to work a lot in at least UP, because bringing the artisans together as a collaborative group. So this was something we initiated our work with. But saying multidisciplinary also was about integrating them together. So one thing that we believed is whole is a part or part is a whole, and that's where the integration starts. So it was a holistic learning where you had to integrate health to understanding of self, to understanding the role of community and identity of a community in craft, and then moving on to the global market, which is the market where all these artisans have to take their crafts on. Uh, so, uh, so we start with multidisciplinary. We understand multidisciplinary. We churn out ideas, the artisans, I would say, because we become a part of that education system. We never say that we have a teacher. We have a knowledge facilitator, and we churn out ideas, integrate those ideas, and final the course progresses towards interpreting those ideas. So that's where the whole structure of the program is. It's a very flexible program that we run. Uh, they think about their own identity, the identity of the local identity of the craft, and about the global market. So what we have seen is the risk taking has artisans have started the enhancement in risk taking capacity. They are open to more possibilities. We have done art residencies where an artist would come and work with them, and the medium is embroidery for the paintings. So these are the kind of projects we have undertaken, and we keep challenging them at every mode. So this is where we've tried to work on with them. And I would say I would just like to share the employer feedback, because we have around 15, 20 of the artisans who are doing really well with, I'm stressing on employment, because for us, the meaning of entrepreneurship changed. As entrepreneurship, we defined as something like where you optimize in an organization wherever you're working. The organization, you really don't need to own, just be the owner of the organization. So being entrepreneurial had a different meaning. So when we interact with people who have employed our graduates and who our graduates are working, so they really they notice their capacity to interpret multidisciplinary and think of colors, not disassociated it from dyeing or other technical skills. So technical design skills, everything goes hand in hand. So that's where this started becoming an asset, because having multidisciplinary as a part of the engagement program. So artisans are engaged, and as we proceed, we also keep evolving. So we are not stagnant with our curriculum. We have a council which keeps relooking at how the delivery is happening, how we need to amend, and we are very dynamic and flexible. Like our course is flexible, we're customizing it to individual artisan needs, and we are flexible in also editing it and bringing about betterments. So what we are doing is we are engaged with artisans. We are grounded in the empathy that we generate. We learn from the artisans. We go back and change how we work with them. So this is a kind of approach we had, and these are baby steps. And we just created a foundation, because it's just been 2 years. 33 graduates have completed till now, and at least we have been able to start something which we wanted to. I would close with Robert Frost's word, the miles to go before we sleep, and that sleep will be about being satisfied that we have contributed about to the education system. So flexible, dynamic, and multidisciplinary. And the core word is integrating all of them together is what we're taking forward, and what is becoming the identity of the graduates from Kalra.
Thank you, Jaspal. That was very clear. And I know that I myself have so many questions, and many other questions have been already posted for both Judy and you. But we will now proceed with to Prakash Bhai. Prakash Bhai, आपका परिवार सदियों से कार्पेट की बुनाई कर रहे हैं। आपने अपनी कला बचपन से सीखी और उसमें आप मास्टर हैं। मास्टर क्राफ्ट्समैन होते हुए भी आपको क्यों लगा कि आपको डिजाइन स्कूल जाने की जरूरत पड़ी? प्रकाश भाई।
जी देखिए, उसमें ऐसा है कि मैंने 2005-6 से वीविंग करना स्टार्ट किया, और मैंने मेरे पापा से वीविंग करना सीखा। तो उससे पहले क्या है कि मेरे पापा है जो वो किसी मास्टर वीवर के लिए जॉब वर्क करते थे। तो फिर मैं उनके साथ जुड़ा और हमने खुद ने अपना काम करना स्टार्ट किया, खुद ने अपना बिजनेस करना स्टार्ट किया था। तो उस वक्त क्या हुआ था कि IICD जयपुर से 2 स्टूडेंट्स आई हुई थी और उन्होंने मेरे साथ कोलैबोरेशन किया था काम। और उस वक्त वो है जो वो डिज़ाइन IICD में डिज़ाइनिंग का कोर्स कर रही थी, तो वो उसकी खुद की डिज़ाइनिंग की लैंग्वेज मुझे बता रही थी कि मुझे इसमें, जैसे वो पीस हम बना रहे थे उसमें वो कह रहे थे कि हमें टेक्सचर करना है, या फिर इसमें हमें ग्रेडेशन करना है, या वो डिज़ाइनिंग की जो भी भाषा बोल रही थी। तो मुझे लगा कि इसमें हमारे काम में कुछ ऐसा भी है कि ये अलग-अलग लैंग्वेजेस भी इसकी है, डिज़ाइन की लैंग्वेजेस है। तो फिर उन्होंने ही मुझे सजेस्ट किया कि हमारी तरह कच्छ में भी जूडी मैम ने ये डिज़ाइन स्कूल शुरू किया है और आप भी वहाँ पे जाके हमारी तरह आप डिज़ाइनिंग सीख सकते हैं। तो उन्हीं से मुझे प्रेरणा मिली और उस वक्त 2007 6-7 में जो क्लासेस हुए थे तो उनका वहाँ पे फैशन शो होता था, तो वो मैंने वहाँ पे देखने के लिए गया था और मुझे लगा कि क्यों ना मैं भी ये सीखूं और हमारे काम को कुछ आगे इस एक स्टेप फॉरवर्ड आगे लेके जाऊं। तो उसी तरह मुझे कुछ आइडियाज हुए और मैंने डिज़ाइन क्लास ज्वाइन करने का सोचा, क्योंकि हमारे जो पूर्वज हैं वो हमारे लिए एक स्टेप तो एक लेवल तो हमारे लिए वो बना के छोड़ गए थे। तो जो यंग जनरेशन है हमारी तरह, तो उनकी एक फर्ज बनती है कि उसको कुछ आगे ले जाके और भी क्राफ्ट को, हमारे जो ट्रेडिशन है उसको और आगे ले जाया जाए। तो ये डिज़ाइन स्कूल करने के बाद हमें वहाँ से बहुत सारे ऐसे आइडियाज़ मिले, या फिर ये जो डिज़ाइनिंग की लैंग्वेज है वो हमें वहाँ से सीखने को मिली कि हमारे काम को किस तरह हमें प्रेजेंट करना है, किस तरह हमको नई डिज़ाइनिंग करनी है, किस तरह हमारे हम जो भी प्रोडक्ट्स बनाते हैं उसमें हमारे जो पुरानी ट्रेडिशन है उसको साथ में ले जाके आगे ले जाना है। वो सब कुछ हमको वहाँ से सीखने को मिला। तो वही जैसे हमारे गांव से और भी मुझसे पहले जो लोग गए थे तो उनका भी मैंने काम देखा था और उनकी भी जो काम करने की सोच जो थी वो उसमें बदलाव आया था। तो उसी से प्रेरित होकर मैंने भी ये सोचा कि क्यों ना मैं भी ये डिज़ाइन स्कूल में अटेंड करूं और वहाँ से कुछ नया सीख के हमारे काम को कुछ आगे ले जाऊं। तो वही सोच के मैंने वो डिज़ाइन स्कूल ज्वाइन किया था और मैंने 2008 में ये डिज़ाइनिंग का कोर्स किया। तो उसके बाद से हमको वहाँ से बहुत सारे आइडियाज मिले और बहुत सारे नए नए आइडियाज और नए नए किस तरह से काम करना है या किसी के साथ किस तरह से बात करनी है या हमारे काम को किस तरह प्रेजेंट करना है, वो सब कुछ हमको वहाँ से सीखने को मिला। और हमारे काम को जैसे जैसे सभी जो अर्थक्वेक आया उसके बाद क्या हुआ था कि हमारे गांव में जो रूम की संख्या है वो बहुत कम हो गई थी, उसमें ज्यादातर यंग जनरेशन नहीं आती थी। उस वक्त इंडस्ट्रीज आ गई थी तो बहुत सारे लोग जो है वो इंडस्ट्रीज में जाना शुरू हो गए थे। तो ये डिज़ाइन स्कूल है या डिज़ाइन एजुकेशन है वो एक उस समय वो परिवर्तन का एक जरिया बन गया और बहुत सारे जो यंग जनरेशन है वो इसमें इन्वॉल्व होने लगी, वहाँ से डिज़ाइन एजुकेशन लेके उसमें इन्वॉल्व होने लगी और हमारा जो पुरानी ट्रेडिशन थी उसको समझने लगी और उसी को अब आगे ले जा रही है। तो इससे ये डिज़ाइन एजुकेशन की वजह से अभी जो हमारे व्यूअर्स की संख्या है वो धीरे धीरे बढ़ने लगी है। तो इसमें ऐसा है कि पहले जैसे मैं काम कर रहा था तो नॉर्मली जैसे रूटीन का जो काम है वही करते रहना है, 8 घंटे जो भी काम किया छोड़ दिया, जो भी और कुछ है खेलने गए वही करते थे। तो ज्यादातर जो नॉलेज जो था ट्रेडिशन के बारे में या फिर हमारे पूर्वज जो हैं वो किस तरह काम करते थे, वो किसके लिए काम करते थे, तो वो सब आइडियाज हमको वहाँ पे मिले कि आपको आपके जैसे हम डिजाइन स्कूल में गए तो वहाँ पे बताया गया है कि आप आपके पूर्वजों के बारे में जाने, वो किस तरह काम करते थे या आपकी ट्रेडिशनल जो डिजाइन्स है उसकी क्या क्या मतलब है, उसकी क्या मीनिंग्स है, वो कहाँ से डेवलप होके आई थी, वो हमारे पूर्वजों ने किस तरह वो बनाई थी। तो हम वहाँ पे गए तो उस ऑटोमेटिकली हमारे अंदर उसमें एक प्रेरणा हुई कि चलो इसका इसका जो हमारा पुराना जो नॉलेज है उसके बारे में भी सोचा जाए और उसको भी आगे सब लोगों को बताया जाए कि किस तरह हम आगे उस ट्रेडिशन को आगे ले जा रहे हैं। तो वो सब कुछ हमको वहां से सीख, पहले क्या है कि हमारे अंदर से ही वो नहीं था कि ठीक है जो भी काम करते हैं हम काम करते रहेंगे, लेकिन इसकी जो नॉलेज है वो सब कुछ हमको वहां से उस वहां जाके उसके वहीं से हम हमारे मन में वो एक प्रेरणा हुई कि ये तो सब कुछ हमारी जो है हमारी परंपरा है उसके बारे में हमको जानना चाहिए और लोगों को बताना चाहिए। तो ये उसी तरह से ये डिजाइन एजुकेशन है वो हमारे लिए बहुत महत्वपूर्ण साबित हुआ है और उसी वजह से अभी अभी की जो है यंग जनरेशन है इसमें बहुत सारी और इन्वॉल्व हो रही है और बहुत से लोग अब वापस से वीविंग में आना शुरू हुए हैं।
Thank you, Prakash Bhai. Thank you. Ashoke Chatterjee, sir. NID has been the premier design school in India from its earliest years in the 1960s. It was engaged with artisans and their crafts from the perspective of educating design students. In this relationship, how did the artisans' own needs for educational opportunity evolve? AC.
Thank you, Ritu, and thanks again for this opportunity and also for us all to pay homage to Kapilaji because the question that you asked is something that exercised her mind for all the time that she was engaged with NID and its activities. Uh, I think you should understand that right from the very start of NID, there was a large community of artisans, including master artisans, on the campus. Every one of the studios was run by artisans. But at the beginning of the institute, when India was experimenting with design education of a kind which had not been attempted anywhere else in the world, the issue at that stage was not about educating the artisan, because it was assumed the artisans were the resource, design resource, the very ground on which we stood. However, at that time, the concentration and the focus was how the crafts of India could be integrated into a design education curriculum, which was meant for young people who would come into this discipline, hopefully, because at that time there's no guarantee, would come into this discipline not knowing what design was, and yet together creating the profession of industrial design that could go out and serve in many sectors. At the same time, in those years, there was the reality that the Institute's teaching philosophy and approach would be learning by doing. And therefore, the marketplace would have to come into the classroom and into the studios. So the first encounter with the problems of the craft sector took place in these two ways. One, the artisans were contributing to the development of design curriculum in various disciplines through their knowledge and their attempt to understand what NID was trying to do about building the curriculum for a new profession in India. When that curriculum began to encounter the problems of the real world, the crafts came back in. Because in those days, when very few people understood what design was, the crafts was one of the first streams of industry that welcomed the trained designer. Why? Because of competition and because of the pressures that were existing on the craft communities, and therefore the need to find a way to flourish in these markets, which were already, I'm talking about the 60s and 70s, were already changing very rapidly. Some of the first opportunities came to us from the area of craft exports, where the artisans as well as the designers were having to cope with clients overseas who were demanding tradition, certainly, but also demanding modernity and a contemporary look and feel. So, what should that be? So, in that way, the engagement with artisans began in the classrooms, in the laboratories, and then moved into the problems which different craft communities were having. It became very clear right in the beginning that there was no silver bullet. There was no one way to address the needs of craft communities. And as you have just heard, the basic concern at that time, as it is now with even greater urgency, was sustainable livelihoods. At about the early mid 70s, when we moved into the experiment that took place in Javaja in Rajasthan, we got a completely different dimension to the importance of education. Here it was not just design education that was needed, but education towards self reliance. How could a craft community learn to stand on its own feet without dependence on others? At about the same time, we moved to the Northeast, where another whole set of craft and design experiences began to unfold. And so it went on and on. And it became very clear that the craft sector was as diverse as any other sector, and there would be no single approach. But one thing stood out very clearly, and that was the importance of working with the craft community to set their own agendas and to give them the confidence and the respect which was so often denied in other places. Confidence and respect is what our campus gave to these communities more than anything else. And as Judy has pointed out, they in fact represent the design tradition of this country. Around that time, we also began to get engaged with Judy's thinking and to learn from her and what happened at Kalaraksha and elsewhere. We began to get engaged with the plan to set up the Institute for Indian Craft and Design in Jaipur, which, as you know, was intended for extending design education to artisans and their children. That's work still in progress. But what was also remarkable then and now is how many graduates of NID working for crafts became, in fact, instructors, teachers, and learners from artisans, so that the distinction between who is the designer and who is the artisan gradually began to melt away. But in all of this, there were no quick fixes, no complete answers, and the challenge is still very much there, particularly now in this dreadful COVID situation, where all of us are having to respond night and day to calls for help and assistance in sustaining livelihoods. And once again, as Judy has mentioned, the importance of education comes straight back into the center. What kinds of education can we innovate? How can we extend this? And how can we also extend this to a new generation of artisans who have aspirations very different to what those were when this whole experiment started? So it's very much a work in progress, and education still has to be done in a myriad ways for this extraordinarily diverse and rich sector.
Thank you, AC. Shobita, you have worked long and hard in bringing the respect and knowledge of traditional arts and crafts into schools across India. I know that this isn't going to be easy to answer, but in the light of the National Educational Policy 2020, can you distill your years of work into just 3 key recommendations that you would want policymakers to implement? What is your wish list?
Thank you, Ritu. It's a difficult question, you're right. The dream is to have a creative India, an India that will contribute to world culture across all spectrums. How do we do that in a school or a college or a university? We want a population that can appreciate the arts, that can appreciate the crafts. To do that, we need to focus on the different types of intelligence that the human being has. Schools tend to concentrate on cognitive intelligence, but emotional intelligence, to deal with diversity, to deal with differences, to deal with the complexity of culture and life today. But the most important for me is creative intelligence. Creative intelligence is very simply understood. It's when you're presented with a new problem, to find a unique and new solution. Now imagine generations of young people growing up with that sort of creative intelligence. The sadness is that the school system is directly opposed to creative intelligence and the development of it. Rote learning, bound by exams and tests. Where's the creativity? Where's the problem where you can find your own unique solution to an idea? And it was always our fight. Ever since I started working with Kamala Devi ji and Kapila ji, our effort was to somehow introduce the arts into the school curriculum so that it provided some opportunity for young people to develop this creative intelligence that is so important, not just for artistic reasons, but because it's the need of the hour. Today, the world is changing so fast. We need people who can adapt to that change with creative solutions. So it would mean an overhauling of the entire NEP and the school system to encourage creativity and make it as important as cognitive or emotional or other forms of intelligence. My second plea would be, and it's not something that I was able to do at all, because I have to admit many failures in my life in this field, is how do we bring traditional master craftsmen, women, young people into the school system to give children the kind of education that they need to have. And for this is my third recommendation. We must be very frank with ourselves. We've got so many NGOs and so many people working in the crafts field. But we're irrelevant now. We're the elite.
Yasmin.
We're not. Yes. And we are of very, very little significance in the scheme of things in India today. What we need to build in every district in India is to have a training center for artisans. But in that training center, we need to nurture advocates from their own community to speak to the President of India, to the district collector, and place before them the importance of their craft and their contributions to the culture of India. It's no point us being the middleman, because we're not relevant anymore. We need to really nurture our crafts community, our creative industries to speak with their own voices at every level of our society. When that happens, we can train artists to work in schools, to work in colleges, to provide that little space in a child's life to appreciate art, to become rasikas for our great artistic tradition, and to contribute to the creative development of this country, to innovate, not copy, not imitate, which we've been doing for decades, but to really be an innovative and creative nation. That's my dream.
Thank you, Shobita. It was a difficult question, but I think you have very clearly said what lies in all our hearts, to be a creative nation, to have creative young. And my last question, before I open out to the 750 people who have registered and the hundreds of questions that have come in, is back to Judy again. Judy, this great pause in our life has been a difficult time, but it has given us time to reflect. And as a pioneer in the field with over 15 years of experience in design education for artisans, I pose the same question that you said was posed to you by a journalist many years back. What is your dream? What do you hope to see coming out of this pandemic?
It's a tall order, but why not dream, right? And I think we've heard from everybody today elements of what I would like to see. First, and foremost, I would like to see that our education program continues in the vision in which it was conceived. And I would like to see more outreach, because I don't envision a monolith, right? Cultural heritage, the diversity, the meaning, the regional distinctions are critical to craft. That is part of the tradition, right? It's not just about skills. So I would like to see outreach into other regions where, as I think Ashokji pointed out, and Jaspalji, his initiative is exactly what we would hope to see in different regions. Educational programs that are geared specifically to the needs and the strengths of the artisans of those regions. So that's what I would like to see as far as the education program. Ultimately, I would like to see the community of artisan designers grow. An artisan designer is a graduate of a design program. More than an artisan designer is not just a designer and not just an artisan. They're a sort of empowered artisan that can create their own work. So I would like to see, and in this community, I would like to see artisan designers recognized, respected, and successful in the terms that they decide. We can't tell them what success means. They can decide it, right? Along with this, we need to have an appropriate market. I think that's really a key right now. A market that appreciates, values craft as a luxury, not for its skill. That's I think, to see how many hours of labor were put into it, that's really missing the point. Valued as a luxury for its creativity and its human connection. I think now, especially, I would hope that one thing we can draw out of this pandemic, and God willing, we will get out of it, but is the value for human connection. Because that's what we're missing right now. That's why, as Rituji said in the very beginning, I wish we could all be here together. We're not. We're here virtually. And so that human connection that we find in wearing something made by someone we know or we met is, I think, has to be valued. And it has to be paid for. And finally, along with that, wishing for a market that values craft. I also would like to see a move toward more conscious consumption, where people buy better and buy less. Because if we don't go in that direction, the ecological problems that are severely impacting our world are just going to grow. We need to value so that fewer things go in the landfill, so that we consume less. We have to consume less. So those two things, the market that appreciates and consuming less may seem at odds, but actually they're part of the same thing. So that's my vision for the next phase.
Thank you. Thank you all. And before I open the floor to questions, I want to thank IIC for hosting us. Thanks to Tete and her amazing program team. And thanks to Good Earth and Global In Journal for their collaboration. There is one question, and I'm not going to state who asked it, because so many people from Tehran, Malaysia, India, several from India have asked the same question. So I'm just going to pose it. And that is, and it's open to the panel. It's not directed at any one person. Why is it so difficult to replicate KRV, SKV, Handloom School, and Kalra, these models of design education for artisans? Sorry, have I gone again? Yeah. Have I gone? Is it clear? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we get you.
Can I be heard? Okay, thanks. Why is it so difficult Why is it so difficult to replicate PRV, SKV, Handloom School, Kalha, and these other models of design education for artisans? We have only 4 or 5 in the last 2 decades. So this is a question open to the panel.
I
Yes,
don't think
Judy.
it's difficult. I mean, I think, we have done outreach projects in Karnataka where the Ilkal sari weavers had barely seen the light of day. And we had the same kind of success. We had people from Prakash Pai's village, graduates of our program, work with artisans there. And I think it's a misunderstanding that artisans are not open to change. It depends on how you present it. If you say somebody, do it this way, or if you engage someone, that's the difference, the approach. But I do think, and Jaspalji, you can speak to this also, that the economic aspects are difficult because you cannot charge artisans what it costs to educate them, simply. So some other form of meeting those economic needs has to be devised, and that is the hardest thing. What do you say, Jaspal?
Yeah, so I think first thing, definitely, you have to engage with artisans. You can't go in like a conventional design institute that I am going to teach you design because they are designers. I would say my initial experience was I've been into conventional design education also. Artisans are much faster at picking up the concepts of design because they have inherent in them, and you really co-work with them. If that's the one principle. Other thing is when Judy mentioned the financial aspect of this, because here mostly you're not drawing a fees. Like in case of Kalha, we do not take a fees. We rather give them a fellowship based on their performance and attendance because they have been disengaged from their livelihood, and they're not a conventional student who just goes to the college and then comes back and earn. We have adult who sustain their families. They're married. They have their families. So there's a financial implication of any such institute. So that vigor to do something or that has to be there with the right approach. So
AC.
I have to get out soon, but I just like to add that I think we should get away from this idea of replication. That's not the issue. You can't replicate craft communities. They're not Xerox copies you can carry around the country. What you can do is extend the learning. You cannot do Kala Raksha in Agartala. It's another ball game. Same thing. Respect the diversity. Extend the learning. Don't try and replicate. Each of these bold experiments have a lesson in them. And please remember that it all started 101 years ago by Gurudev in Shantiniketan and largely failed. And what we have failed to do is to learn from his experience because he also had to face many of these issues. And he was also asked, why can't you go to scale? Why can't there be 100 Shantiniketans? That was not the point. The point was to try and sensitize people to understanding what the potential was and working out what Judy has mentioned, location-specific responses, which are led by and directed by artisans. And I think that's where the real collaboration between educational institutions and the artisan communities comes in. There's no point in trying to work out who is more authentic as a designer or as an artisan. Those are pointless. Artisans themselves never raise that issue. What you have to do is respect the fact that they are the design tradition of this country and that they are as open as anybody is to learning and to change. And all the rest of the educational community has to understand that we have this gigantic resource that we do not even respect. That's the issue that Shobita has brought to the table. It's just ridiculous that 75 years after independence, we're actually talking about the need for craft education in schools. Good heavens, why was crafts at the center of the freedom struggle? Have we learned absolutely nothing from Gandhiji and from Gurudev? It seems we can't learn. But I think, as has been mentioned, the ball is now in the court of civil society. We have to do the demonstration. Stop waiting for others. How many experiments like those that Judy and the Handloom School and the others have done, and Jaspalji has done in Lucknow, how many of those can we support? How can we get corporates to put some money down on the table, local corporates, to promote the craft communities in their community, in their locations? That's where the money will have to come from. Thank you, and I'm sorry I've got to leave just now, but all the very best.
Thank you, AC. Bye. Shobita?
Right.
I think we have to be very aware of the ground realities in India. We are a really caste class-ridden society. That the status of the artist is so low that to raise its profile, we need to attach ourselves, like Judy said, to global issues like craft and climate change, craft and employment, craft and the removal of poverty. These are the really strong points about why we want to sustain the craft. Not because it's pretty and because it's beautiful and decorate your house, but because it's essential for our country to have it. But the status of the crafts and the communities is so low at the moment. Everyone wants their children to become engineers or doctors because there's money there. And in this dichotomy, the arts are looked down upon. Every single home fears that their child will be creative because they're not controllable, they're exciting, they're innovative, they think out of the box. But that doesn't answer to the school system anymore, and it doesn't answer to society. People want people who will conform and follow. It's a big battle. It's a really big battle.
This has been such a, I don't know. I'm going to step away from this question and ask the next question. And I hope I get some answers which contain some hope. I've got really depressed at the moment. And that is, how do you get the young to continue? How do you get them to come into these schools? What is it that can draw them in? And that question is actually directed at you, Jaspal, but I leave it open for the whole panel.
Okay. So basically, I think next generation coming to craft has to be by choice. It has to be logical to the next generation. Why can't a common person become a craftsperson or an artisan? Why do we have an approach that a craftsperson's son only needs to pursue craft? Do we follow the same logic for an engineer or for a doctor? I think yes, they should have a choice, and they should by choice make it their profession, not by force, because they cannot do anything else. I think that mindset has to go out away from everyone who approaches craft. One thing is, yes, with once we see, as Shobita ji has already mentioned, the kind of wages and kind of lack of dignity which Judy has been talking. If these two social and economic factors are missing in any profession, who would like to be in that profession? So we have to first create an ecosystem which is conducive for them to continue with crafts. And talking about the challenges or artisans' reluctance to join such institutes, I think that's a milestone. If we do not face those reluctance, till the time we do not start showing some results, I think that's a milestone. If we are facing that, I think that's a milestone that shows that we are going on the right path.
Judy?
I think
Judy.
I think Prakash Bhai has already mentioned that, but maybe we should hear from him about what the aspirations of the next generation of artisans is. Prakash Bhai?
जी, तो इसमें ऐसा है कि अभी की जो नई जनरेशन है, वो ऐसा नहीं कि जो व्यूअर हैं उनके ही बेटे व्यू कर रहे हैं या वो फिर हायर एजुकेशन नहीं ले रहे हैं। अभी अभी ऐसा भी हो रहा है कि जो हाईली एजुकेटेड है या जो एमबीए किए हुए है या जो इंजीनियर है, वो भी कर रहे हैं। तो वो भी वीविंग में जुड़ रहे हैं और वीविंग को आगे ले जाने में वो भी हेल्प कर रहे हैं। तो सिर्फ ऐसा नहीं है कि जो वीवर फैमिली से है वो हायर एजुकेशन नहीं लेता है या फिर कंटिन्यू वीविंग को ही करता है। वो हायर एजुकेशन लेने के बाद भी वीविंग में कंटिन्यू वापस आता है और वीविंग में ज्वाइन करना है, ना कि जॉब को एक ऑप्शन लेके वो अपने वीविंग बिजनेस को भी आगे बढ़ा रहे हैं। तो अभी ये भी थोड़ा सा चेंजेस आया है यंग जनरेशन में।
And I think Prakash Bhai, as the advisor to SKV, representing his community and so many people in Kutch, I think his answer actually gives more hope that there is going to be change. People are interested. They want to learn. They want to layer on traditional knowledge of formal education. And that is what I think is a remarkable thing, that these institutes, however small, however few, are doing. And which is why we've had so many people come to listen today, because they see them as beacons of light. Yes, it is really dismal out there. And in the midst of this COVID-19, we are actually finding it hard to find hope. But I think hearing Jaspal, hearing Shobita, you, hearing Ashoke Chatterjee and Judy, there is something. And Shobita asked me a question yesterday when we were chatting. She said, what do you want out of this webinar? And I thought about it and I answered her. I said, what I want is that for those who listen in, to realize it is possible in our own very small way. It may be 10, it may be 20, it may be 30 artisans. We can bring about change. You know, we may not have the numbers in our hand, we may not be policymakers, but we can inspire others to bring about change in their own small way. And on this note, I've got a message from the studio that we have to close up. But before I close, I want to say such a huge thank you to all you, as I said in the beginning, radical, unorthodox, socially conscious people who have spent your life committed to something in, I'm sure, the hardest of circumstances. So a very big thank you to you. And to all those people who asked so many questions and are listening in, I want to say that on the Global Inch Journal, www.globalinch.org, there are long reads by all the people on the panel. So while we haven't been able to answer your question, these long reads will allow you to see actually what lies below their answers. So thank you all once again. And I hope we can all come back and meet actually face to face and have this discussion and talk about what we are doing 6 months to 8 months later. Thank you all. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.
Bye. Thank
Thank you, Prakash. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Audio.